What is a penalty kick? A penalty kick is when a player is allowed to take a single shot on the goal while it is defended only by the opposing team's goalkeeper. There are two ways this can occur. 1. A player is fouled in the 18-yard box, or 2. A game ends in a tie and a penalty kick off is required. These kicks can be taken by anyone on the field, normally by someone with a good power and accuracy without giving the target spot away. It is kicked with the laces of the cleat to allow for this power behind the ball.
Kicking phases, where the power within the kick is generated as momentum increase. The plant foot is placed beside the ball in an outstretched length. Backswing. During this phase, you line up with the ball and the goal based off of sight. The kicking leg will be extended to prepare the body for a downward motion. Downward motion, the force-produced component where the athlete swings their right leg to meet the ball. Ball impact, the phase where contact is made with the ball. The foot is plantar flexed and striking the bottom of the ball. Follow through. The kicking foot is transitioning from acceleration to deceleration, normally kicked across the body with a rotation of the hip with addition of a small hop. First purpose is to allow for the most contact with the ball the longest. The second purpose is adding a hop to prevent the body from injury and cushioning/stabilizing the motion.
Approach. The kicking leg consisted of using the tibio-talar joint, talonavicular joint, tarso-metatarsal joint, the metatarsophalangeal joint, the calcaneal-cuboid joint, and the subtalar joint in the foot and ankle. In the knee, the patellofemoral joint and the tibiofemoral joint are the two joints used. The hip consisted of the acetabular femoral joint. The range of motion in the foot and ankle started at 114 degrees planar flexion and ended in 118 degrees planar flexion, with a total range of 88 to 127 degrees. The knee started at 124 degrees flexion and ended at 151 degrees flexion, with the total range of motion being 120 to 158 degrees. The hip started in 152 degrees flexion and ended in 194 degrees extension, with the range being 149 to 195 degrees. The plane was the oblique plane due to the rotation of the hip and the foot and ankle. The stabilizing leg consisted of the same joints as previously stated, just with a different variety. Concentrically, the muscles that were the prime movers was the gastroc, the tibialis posterior, bicep femoris, semimembranosus, the semitendinosus, and the gluteus maximus, as long as the sartorius. The secondary muscles included the soleus, the abductor brevis, abductor longus and magnus, gracilis, gluteus minimus, the TFL, and the piriformis. Eccentrically consisted of the anterior tibialis, fibularis, longus and brevis, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, vastus lataris, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, rectus femoris, adductor longus, magnus and brevis, the gracilis, gluteus minimus, the TFL, gluteus maximus, piriformis. The stabilizers on the opposite leg consisted of the gluteus minimus, maximus, and medius, the rectus femoris, the bicep femoris, vastus medialis, the vastus lataris, the vastus intermedialis, the sartorius, abductor magnus and brevis, and the anterior and posterior tibialis, along with the gastroc, soleus, iliopsoas, and the longus brevis. Besides the opposite leg, some stabilizers also include the erectator spinae, the rectus abdominals, external and internal obliques, the transverse abdominals, the anterior, posterior, and medial deltoid, the upper trap, the sternoid, clymastoid, and the trapezius.
Backswing. The foot and ankle on the kicking leg as a whole will be adducted and plantar flexed during this motion. The knee will be slightly flexed and go into almost full flexion at the tibiofemoral joint as the patellofemoral joint moves proximal when flexed. Hips, the acetabular femoral joint starts slightly extended, adducted, and externally rotated and goes into full extension. Range of motions, the foot and ankle start at 127 degrees plantar flexion and end at 82 degrees plantar flexion. The total range of motion is 82 to 127 degrees. The knee is starting at 158 degrees flexion ending at 123 degrees flexion and goes through a total range of motion of 123 to 158 degrees, while the hip starts at 197 degrees extension and ends at 186 degrees extension. The total range of motion is 186 to 205 degrees. The planes which this motion is moved through are the oblique planes due to the rotation of the hip and the foot and ankle. The stabilizing lift the left leg. The foot and ankle as a whole will start in plantar flexion at 90 degrees flexion with the floor. The knee at the tibiofemoral joint is slightly flexed and the patellofemoral joint slightly proximal movement when the tibiofemoral joint is flexed. The hip's acetabulofemoral joint is slightly flexed. The muscles used during this motion: concentrically the gastroc, the tibialis posterior, the bicep femoris, the semimembranosus and semitendinosus, adductor longus, magnus, brevis, the glute max are all prime movers. For secondary movers, you have the soleus, the gluteus minimus, the sartorius, and the piriformis. For full details on their exact motion, look above. Eccentrically, the tibialis anterior, fibrialis longus, brevis, semimembranosus, and tendinosus, vastus lateralis, medialis, and intermedius, rectus femoris, gracilis, gluteus minimus, TFL, the gluteus maximus, piriformis, and adductor brevis are all used, with concentric and eccentric muscle movement being switched throughout the movement. Your primary and secondary users may be swapped. Stabilizers are isometric, and on the opposing leg, it is everything in the lower leg containing the gastrocs, the glute med, min, and max, rectus femoris, bicep femoris, vastus medialis, intermedius, lateralis, the sartorius, the adductors, the posterior tibialis, the soleus, the iliopsoas, and the longus and brevis are utilized, as well as erector spinae, rectus abdominis, external obliques, internal obliques, transverse abdominis, anterior deltoid, posterior deltoid, medial deltoid, upper traps, trapezius as a whole, and the sternocleidomastoid.
Downward motion. On the kicking leg, the foot and ankle joints are as followed: the tibio-talar joint, talonavicular joint, tarso-metatarsal joint, metatarsal phalangeal joint, calcaneo-cuboid joint, and the subtalar joint. The knee are as followed: the patellofemoral joint and the tibiofemoral joint, and the hip consists of the acetabulofemoral joint. The range of motion in the foot and ankle started at 76 degrees plantar flexion and ended at 98 degrees plantar flexion, with the total range of motion being 66 to 98 degrees. The knee started at 111 degrees flexion and ended at 138 degrees flexion, therefore the total range of motion being 109 to 205 degrees. The hip started with 205 degrees extension and ended with 175 degrees of flexion, with the total range of motion being between 175 to 205 degrees. This motion occurred through the oblique plane. The left leg used the same joints as stated before, but used them in just a slightly different way. That can be noted while reading the slide. The concentrically contracting muscles included the prime movers, the gastroc, tibialis posterior, the bicep femoris, the semimembranosus, the semitendinosus, and the sartorius. The secondary movers were the soleus, the adductor brevis, adductor longus and magnus, gracilis, gluteus minimus, the TFL, and the pisiformis. Eccentrically, you had the anterior tibialis, the fibularis longus and brevis, the semimembranosus, the semitendinosus, the vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, the rectus femoris, the adductor longus brevis and magnus, gracilis, gluteus minimus, the TFL, gluteus maximus, and pisiformis. The stabilizers on the opposite leg that were isometrically contracting are the same as previously stated. Feel free to reference the slide to explore more details.
Ball impact. On the right kicking foot, the foot and ankle as a whole will be plantar flexed and internally rotated. The knee at the tibiofemoral joint is slightly flexed, causing the proximal movement of the patellofemoral joint. The hip's acetabulofemoral joint is flexed and internally rotated. These range of motions vary. They start at the ankle at 98 degrees and end at 90 with a range of motion in 90 and 131 degrees. The knee goes through a total degrees of 138 to 169 as its start and stop point. The hip goes through a whole degrees of 167 to 175 as its start and start point also. The plane of motion that is occurring through is the oblique plane due to the rotation of the limbs. The left stabilizing leg at the foot and ankle, you will see dorsiflexion with the floor. The knee at the tibiofemoral joint is flexed to the whole motion, causing proximal movement at the patellofemoral joint. The hip's acetabular-femoral joint is extended opposite of the other leg. Muscles that are concentrically contracted as the prime movers are the gastroc, the tibialis posterior, the gracilis, the gluteus minimus, the tensor fasciae latae, or the TFL, the sartorius. The secondary movers are the biceps femoris, the adductor brevis, and the soleus. Eccentric contractions are the anterior tibialis, the fibularis longus and brevis, semitendinosus and membranosus, vastus lateralis, medialis, intermedius, rectus femoris, adductor longus and magnus, gracilis, gluteus minimus, TFL, the gluteus maximus, piriformis. Stabilizers during this motion are the same as every other kicking phase. During this motion, you will also see that the prime movers and the secondary movers can swap between concentric and eccentric contractions depending on when used. Follow through. On the kicking leg, the right leg, the foot and ankle is plantar flex and internally rotated to landing in dorsiflexion. The knee is extended all the way through the motion, causing the patellofemoral joint to be extended distally. The hip's acetabular femoral joint is flexed and internally rotated to landing extended. The range of motions at the foot is 90 starting to ending at 99 with a full range of 60 to 134 degrees. The knee is starting at 169 and ending at 178 with a range of motion of 160 to 180 degrees. The hip is started at 167 and ended at 199 with a range of motion of 134 to 208 degrees. The planes moved through this motion are the oblique plane due to all the rotation of the hip and knees. The left stabilizing legs, foot, and ankle is starting in dorsiflexion and then plantar flexion at the push-off hop, landing in dorsiflexion. The knee at the tibiofemoral joint is flexed and abducted, swinging to extension, as the patellofemoral joint is distally when extended and proximally when flexed. The hip's acetabular femoral joint is extended with abduction, swinging, and external rotation. The muscles that are concentrically contracted primarily are the gastroc, tibialis posterior, the semimembranosus and tendinosus, gluteus maximus, sartorius, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, while the secondary movers are the soleus, the biceps femoris, the adductor brevis, the adductor longus and magnus, gracilis, gluteus minimus, tensor fasciae latae, piriformis, and the rectus femoris. The eccentric contraction muscles are the anterior tibialis, fibularis longus and brevis, seminembanosus, semitendinosus, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, rectus femoris, adductor longus brevis, magnus, gracilis, gluteus minimus, TFL, gluteus maximus, piriformis, rectus femoris. The stabilizers are the same as every other phase, but during this phase, the primary and secondary movers switch between concentrically contracting and eccentrically contracting depending on the time during the motion. Bringing it all together. When looking at the movement as a whole, you need to see the full kinetic chain of phases. When her body is turned, it can affect the whole motion and make the force produced decrease. For instance, she has the internally rotated or inversion foot, causing the knee and hip to be deviated. These deviations take away from the force and power produced. Now, with the same inverted foot, you see the ball is still struck at the bottom, just with a combination of laces and outside the foot contact. Along with the foot alignment and ball contact, the backward swing helps with production of force. When watching the track of the kick, you can see she has the same path as the expert, just at different in knee and hip motions. Because of this, you will see the same amount of accuracy, just less force. The hop at the end of the kick is there to allow for injury prevention. Without that, the player would not be able to slow down properly, causing a knee injury. The weight shift that she lacks during the kick is also used to allow for balance when landing on the kicking leg after going through full range of motion. When calculating acceleration, force produced, work rate, and power output, you need to find the mass. To find her mass, she weighs a total of 120 pounds. From there, you get the total leg, the total arm, and whole trunk percentages to find the mass, which comes out to be 41.69 kilograms. From there, you plug it into the formulas for acceleration, force produced, work rate, and power output, resulting in 1.2 centimeters per second squared acceleration, a force of 50.028 newtons, a work rate of 14,687.22, and a work output of 12,239.35. When comparing, there are similarities and differences. As you can see, the stages of an expectation and reality kick. During both kicks, you see a plantar flexion push-off on the supporting leg, and the start-up/run-off is the same with foot plantar flexed, knee extended, and hip flexed. They are both finishing the kick under the body adducted, and the supporting leg is also adducted. As far as differences, the reality compared to the expectation, the foot is internally rotated or inversion through the whole motion. There is slight abduction swing before the adduction landing as compared to the expectation. At the ball impact, the knee is flexed where it should be extended/slightly flexed. More upright and straight core body instead of leaning on the kicking foot after the kick trying to balance.
To fix foot inversion, she should foam roll her gastroc/soleus, her bicep femoris, and her TFL/IT band, each for 30 seconds. To work on lengthening, she should stretch her gastroc, her soleus, supine bicep femoris, and a standing TFL stretch. All these can be done for 30 seconds. For isolated strengthening, with a TheraBand, she should work on resisted ankle dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, and inversion. All these can be done 10 times for 2 sets. Also, a single leg calf raise can be done on both legs 15 times for 2 sets. She should do a resisted knee flexion with hip internally rotated with a TheraBand 12 times for 2 sets. For an integrated dynamic movement, a single leg balance reach can be done on either a foam pad or a Bosu ball for 10 times for two sets.
How to help with weight shift and hip rotation. Inhibit the myofascial release. For exercises, you're going to foam roll your gastroc, your soleus, your biceps, your adductors, and your piriformis, all for one set of 30 seconds. To lengthen and static stretch, you're going to do the exercises of standing adductor stretch on both sides for one set of 30 seconds, your gastroc and soleus stretch, standing on a slanted wedge on both sides, one set for 30 seconds, supine bicep femoris stretch, one set for 30 seconds on both sides, standing piriformis stretch, one set, 30 seconds on both sides. Activation with the isolated stretching exercises will consist of resisted adduction and abduction, both 2 sets of 15. It's going to be done on both sides with TheraBand attached to the ankle and secured by a wall or a table as going throughout the motion. Dynamic movement exercises will be wall ball squats with overhead press, 2 sets of 15, 30-second rest, and stay slow and controlled for complete activation of the muscles.
To show we didn't just use our brains for this project, here is our references.